Celeste is a game about climbing a mountain. That's fairly well-trodden ground in terms of storytelling, from Getting Over It to God of War to A Short Hike, but of any of the ones I've seen, nothing has ever been so overt in its metaphor. Celeste is a game about living with anxiety. To anyone who's played the game, I don't think that needs much explaining. It's not even subtext, really. The game spells it out for you in blatant terms for the most part, with the mountain acting as a seemingly insurmountable manifestation of Madeline's greatest fears, and her alter ego is her own anxiety and self-doubt. She has panic attacks and moments of intense self-hatred and doubt, but throughout the story she learns different coping mechanisms and learns to accept and to love who she is, the other part of her included. With just this basic read of the game, it already became one of my all-time favorite games back when I played it in 2018. While many of the direct textual experiences that Madeline was going through didn't have any direct parallels to my life, I could always empathize with her on a level I never could with most other game characters. Celeste is a game about living with anxiety, but my emotional tie to that game was never in moments like The Feather. It wasn't about snapping back at Mr. Oshiro, and yet it stuck with me for years. Why? Celeste is a game about finding peace in yourself, even if it may not be the self you'd imagined. Early on in the game we meet Theo, a character who, despite still having baggage of his own to deal with, has clearly come to terms with that and made peace with those elements of himself, and he acts as a guiding hand that gently nudges Madeline to finding herself. It's a decision she still has to make by herself, ultimately, but in having people who've already climbed their own mountains to help her, she eventually realizes what she has to do and makes that final decision to transition into her true self. Celeste is a game about being trans. To some people, specifically trans people, this might be incredibly obvious. There were certainly clues, most obviously the pride flag visible in one of the final shots of the farewell update, but I think for a lot of people, myself included, the real breaking point was a blog post that developer Maddy Thorson made late last year, in which they not only come out as trans themselves, but outright confirm that Madeline is essentially a self-insert character and that her journey is one that, unconscious even to them at the time, mirrored and reflected the one that they would be taking in that discovery for themselves. When I heard about this, it bugged me. It wasn't in any sort of negative way, but there was this nagging feeling that wouldn't go away for months that was like, this means something. It took me a while to figure out what that something was. When you play Celeste, your method of interaction is similar to plenty of other indie platformers that have come out over the past 10 years, Super Meat Boy and other splatformers. You jump and dash your way through an assortment of levels with a different gimmick tied to each, all the while pushing through an immense wall of difficulty. Where Celeste differs, however, is in its choice and in its options for what you can choose to engage with. Collectible strawberries are neat, as the game says, but ultimately they do nothing, so you should only collect them if you feel compelled to. I definitely felt compelled to. This level of choice, combined with the fact that it's essentially impossible to lose more than 30 seconds of progress, gives the game a sense of positive momentum, pushing you forward without telling you how you should be playing. Even in its hardest and most grueling moments, Celeste is here to empower you and to encourage you to push onwards. The game is simultaneously the mountain and the friends who are helping you to climb it. Madeline, though, doesn't feel empowered, at least not at first. Early on in the game, she meets the other part of herself that I mentioned earlier, humorously dubbed Madeline sometimes. She represents everything that Madeline hates about herself. Her self-doubt, as I mentioned before, But what's far more interesting to me is the way that we come across this being of anxiety and intense stress. We find her in a mirror. This seems innocuous at a glance, right? I mean, it's probably just another piece of imagery. This is Madeline's alter ego, after all, the mirrored version, opposite to everything she wants to be. When I first played the game back in 2018, this is absolutely what I thought as well. But when I replayed it earlier this year, I started to realize that Celeste has an obsession with mirrors. Cracked mirrors, evil mirrors, mirror temple, mirror worlds, mirrors and dreams. This can't be a coincidence, right? Whenever Madeline looks into a mirror, she sees this version of herself that doesn't match who she wants to be. When I look into a mirror, Okay. This is me. I am trans. My pronouns are she, they, and he, and I am a lesbian. To some of you watching, this may be a surprise. To many, it won't be. I've shown my hand in a lot of smaller ways to people close to me, but this is the closest thing to coming out as I ever intend to do. I'm making this video because, in addition to a bunch of other contributing factors, Celeste is the primary instrument in my own discovery of who I am and in coming to the conclusions I'm sharing with you today. Basically, Celeste made me trans. My own personal experience with being trans is an interesting one because dysphoria is a concept that I always considered alien to me. I don't want surgery. I don't feel any kind of discomfort with my body, at least I didn't think. I'm generally pretty happy with myself in that regard, but something I've never been a fan of is mirrors. When I would look into a mirror, this is what I would see. And you know what? This is fine. I used to be incredibly conscious about how ugly I was, but frankly, this isn't all that bad looking of a guy. But that's the thing, this mirrored version of me, much like the one in Celeste, represents all the things that I always hated about myself, the things that I needed to escape and to leave behind. The time Madeline spends in the Mirror Temple area is different from anything else in the game. It's the most challenging and confusing part of the game thus far, and it's also the darkest, both in terms of navigation and in terms of tone. Here we essentially watch Madeline tear herself from the inside out with guilt and frustration, and while there are definitely moments of self-loathing all throughout her journey, here they're the most poignant because no longer are they a loathing for the other part of herself. No, here Madeline is tearing apart the real version of herself, the one that she's been working all this time to better and the one that she's been her entire life. It feels like this one has reached the end of its youth cycle. Nowhere is this more obvious than towards the middle of the segment, where Madeline is literally captured and is controlled by a mirror. Here she sees herself as a monster, a creature too disgusting to behold, and the only option to escape this to her is to let it consume her. The only way to escape the monster that she feels that she embodies is to kill herself. There's a moment right at the beginning of the game, towards the end of the first level. In my first playthrough, I paid it no mind, but when I was replaying the game for footage for this video, as well as to refresh myself on the game's general plot, it hit me like a brick to the chest. You've made it through your first challenge, ascended the first chunk of the mountain. You've proven to yourself and to the game that whether it took you 1 try or 100, you have the ability to power through. You can do this. And that's when you're met with this monument. This memorial dedicated to those who perished on the climb, it says. I don't know if I can properly articulate how this makes me feel. When I saw this after having completely forgotten it was here. I couldn't believe it. I don't think that there's a single frame in a video game that has touched me on such a deep and such a crushing level as this one. I'm lucky. I've not had to go through the pain of losing someone to suicide. I've not had to struggle with those thoughts myself. I struggle, yeah, I'm anxious. I've had bouts of depression, including this past month trying to write this script, but I've yet to feel hopeless or like there's no escape. And even if I did, I am privileged enough to have the resources to get help if I truly need it. Not everyone has that option. I think one of the biggest hurdles for me coming to terms with my own identity was the fact that for years I saw nothing but harassment thrown against the trans community. The spaces I chose to inhabit as a younger teenager definitely influenced that, but frankly, there aren't that many trans success stories out there, and what few we get are hidden away or deemed too politically charged for wide recognition. When one of your two political parties is predicated on eradicating or converting you, when your own country is actively trying to legislate you out of existence, when the online spaces you need to promote the work to keep food on the table thrive off the engagement of the people who want you gone, it's hard not to see success as an impossibility, to see living a normal life as an impossibly tall mountain to climb. Is it even worth it if every time I feel like I'm close to the top, someone's going to knock me back down? But even in its bleakest moments, Celeste tells you that it is worth it, and that no matter how you choose to climb your mountain, you are valid, and there's going to be people who can help you through. There's no timeline to follow. You can take it as fast or as slow as you'd like, and you can use whatever means you feel you have to make it a more comfortable process. It's your journey and yours alone, and you have nobody to impress but yourself when it comes to your own life's process. You don't even have to reach for the top. Theo says when you first meet him that he's not aiming for the summit, and despite the fact that he's clearly capable of doing so if he wanted to, he sticks to his guns, only going as far as he needs to feel satisfied, and he does so without judgment. The metrics of your success are wholly subjective. When Madeline first begins her journey, she's not a mountain climber. She's going in totally blind, with no idea how to reach her goals or how to process her anxieties. Through her own will to succeed and through trial and error, she learns how to cope as you learn how to play, to the point that when she falls down to her lowest point, literally the base of the mountain at the end of the game, there's nothing stopping her from getting back up and going again. She's a mountain climber now. She knows how this works. It's different this time, harder in a lot of ways, but she's faced this kind of challenge before and will likely face something similar again. The determination that she saw to be a flaw earlier in the game becomes her greatest strength, the strength that leads to her ultimate success. Celeste is a game about being trans. Not just that, it's the trans success story that video games have been missing for nearly half a century. In a medium that has long mocked trans identities, and one whose community is still largely blind to the irony of demanding that politics be removed from their art, I'm proud to be represented in such a beautiful and understanding way by wonderful people who have shaped my own life in different ways. Seeing Lena Raine perform happily at the Game Awards in 2018 and realizing, wait, I can do that? And reading Maddy's blog post about their own experience coming to terms with their identity, subtly coming to a lot of my own realizations through that. These are both tide shift moments in my life that I couldn't imagine myself without. Celeste is the game that not only showed me the identity I could have, but it gave me the insight to the paths I could take to get there. I've never been much for climbing, but thanks to Celeste, the way up that mountain is looking a lot more familiar and a lot less scary.